All right, let's talk about the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, the MBTI. It's got to be one of the most popular personality tools on the planet, but wow, is it also one of the most criticized. Today, though, we're diving into something really interesting, a potential mathematical formula that's been designed to fix its biggest, most glaring problems. So, have you ever taken the test, you get your four-letter type, and you just kind of think, yeah, that's sort of me, but not always? Or maybe you take it again a month later and get a totally different result. If that sounds familiar, you are definitely not alone. It's a super common experience, and it points directly to some of the deep, long-standing issues with the whole system. And it turns out that feeling isn't just in your head. It lines up perfectly with the major critiques of the MBTI. The results are famous for changing over time. The descriptions can sometimes feel like a horoscope, right? So vague they could apply to almost anyone. And, maybe most importantly, for decades, it's really struggled to get solid scientific validation. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of these questions. Why exactly has the academic community kept the MBTI at arm's length for so long? Well, it really boils down to a few core, nagging puzzles in its theory. This right here, this quote absolutely hits the nail on the head. The single biggest problem is oversimplification. Human personality is a huge, complex spectrum, but the MBTI often forces you into these rigid black and white boxes. You're either an extrovert or an introvert, period. There's no room for being somewhere in the middle. And that's just not how people work, which is a huge reason for all the skepticism. And this is where things get really messy. There's a fundamental mix-up right at the heart of the popular MBTI. In Carl Jung's original work, the judging functions were thinking and feeling, the rational ways we make decisions. But in the pop culture version of MBTI, J somehow came to mean being organized and liking plans. This huge disconnect between the original theory and the modern test creates a ton of confusion and really weakens the whole model. Now, for anyone who's gone a little deeper down the personality theory rabbit hole, you've probably heard about the 8 cognitive functions, maybe models like John Beebe's. But here's the problem. The simple 4-letter MBTI report doesn't really explain how it connects to that deeper, more nuanced model. There's a link missing, a bridge that was never built. So, with all these problems on the table, a new solution has been proposed. And what's fascinating is that it's not another personality theory, it's a mathematical one. It's called the Shitani Yoshimoto MBTI Formula, or SYMF for short. And it's designed to be that missing bridge, a set of rules to bring some consistency to all the chaos. So what is it really? Well, you can think of the SYMF as an algorithm. It takes the standard scores you get from an MBTI test and runs them through a very specific set of mathematical rules. The whole point is to create a stable, consistent, and theoretically sound map of your personality, one that finally connects the simple 4 letters with the complex cognitive models. And this formula is designed to do a very specific job, to tackle 3 of the most fundamental flaws in the entire MBTI system. Okay, so let's break down exactly how the SYMF offers a mathematical fix for each of these 3 big problems. First up, it goes right after that oversimplification problem. Instead of forcing you into a rigid E-box or I-box, the SYMF treats your scores as what they are, data on a spectrum. It recognizes that you aren't 100% one or the other. This simple shift allows for a much more nuanced and, honestly, a much more accurate picture of who you are. Second, it addresses that huge gap, that disconnect with the 8 cognitive functions. The SYMF acts as that missing mathematical bridge we were talking about. And it does this by cleverly remapping the MBTI scales to align them correctly with their original Jungian meanings, which finally connects the simple report to the deep structure underneath. And here's the magic trick, how it actually works. The SYMF reassigns the scores. The P versus J score is used to clarify the perceiving functions. That's sensing and intuition. Meanwhile, the E versus I score is used to clarify the rational functions. That's thinking and feeling. This one move fixes that old confusion and puts the letters back where they're supposed to be, theoretically speaking. And the third, and you could argue the most critical problem it solves, is figuring out your true dominant function. In a lot of systems, it can be really tough to tell which function is genuinely in the driver's seat of your personality versus one that's just showing up strong because of, your mood or what's going on at work that week. The SYMF uses this really elegant two-step rule to just eliminate the guesswork. First, it looks at your scores and asks a simple question. Is the gap between your E and I scores bigger, or is the gap between your P and J scores bigger? Whichever one is wider determines the domain of your dominant function. Then, and only then, does it look for the highest scoring function inside that domain. This simple process prevents a strong but secondary function from being mistaken for the real boss. So, what's the ultimate payoff of all this math? What do we get? It really comes down to one word: stability. By applying these rules over and over again across multiple tests, you can start to filter out the noise and find the core, stable part of your personality, the part that doesn't just change with your mood. This chart shows the power of the SYMF approach perfectly. Just imagine you take the test, say, a dozen times over a year. Your true dominant function, in this case it's NI, is going to stay consistently high, test after test. Other functions that are strong but not dominant, they'll fluctuate, and the ones you only use in certain situations, they'll be all over the place. The formula lets your true core driver just emerge from the data with real statistical certainty. So when you put all of this together, what the SYMF is really trying to give you is something the traditional MBTI often can't: a coherent, stable, and theoretically sound map of your own personality. And this matters. It really does. For you, as an individual, it means getting a stable understanding of what truly drives you. For teams in a workplace, it helps you see the difference between someone's deep structural strengths versus the skills they're just using temporarily. And for researchers, it finally builds that long-awaited bridge between the popular MBTI and actual academic models. The big takeaway here is a personality map that gets smarter and more accurate with data, instead of just changing on a whim. You know, it's a pretty bold idea. By applying a clear, consistent mathematical logic, the SYMF is trying to bring a whole new level of rigor to a field that's often been called a soft science. And it leaves us with this really compelling question: could a simple set of rules actually be the key to unlocking a truly scientific way to understand our own minds?